Hello everyone, how are you? I hope you are doing great and welcome to the part 7 of our Java Basic series. Now, if you haven't watched our previous parts yet, please make sure you watch them. Now, in this session, we are going to learn about loops in Java. What are loops? What are the different types of loops present in Java? But before jumping into loops, let's learn what is if-else condition is. Okay, let's learn first what is if-else condition. If-else condition is nothing but it checks whether a condition is true or not. Right, let me explain with example of syntax how the if else condition syntax looks like. First, if we'll give a condition for this. Now if this condition is true, then we execute the logic inside this if loop. Right, if the condition, for suppose I am giving some condition here inside this parenthesis. If this condition is true, then this logic executes. If this condition is false, then the logic in the else block executes. Right, this is the syntax of if else condition. Initially we will provide a condition with if in parenthesis. If this condition is successful, mean this condition is passes, then the logic inside this if block executes. If this condition is false, then the logic inside this else block executes. Right, I hope you are good with the concept and syntax of if else condition. Now I will let's go through a example to understand this more deeply. Right, now I want to write a code. Before writing this code, I want to explain you something. Now you know voting, right? How to vote? When we will be eligible for voting? When our age is 18 or greater than 18, right? If our age is 18 or greater than 18, then we are eligible to vote. If our age is below 18, then we are not eligible for voting. Right? Now let's execute this logic through if else loop. Now here I am declaring one variable as age and I am declaring it as 18. Right, now I will use if condition. Now inside this parenthesis the condition is if age is greater than or equal to 18. Right, this is the case where we are eligible to vote. Right, if age is 18 or greater than 18, then we are eligible to vote. So that in system.out.println I'll print ahead and vote. Right, now in else you should need to print system.out.println not able for voting. Right, what I am doing here, initially I declared a variable called int age is equal to 18. Now the concept of voting is if our age is equal to 18 or greater than 18, then we can vote. So that it says go ahead and vote. I am giving a condition here in if parenthesis. I am giving condition as if age is greater than or equal to 18, then we can go ahead and vote. If this condition is false, then we are not eligible for voting. Right, let me execute this java space demo.java. First we need to compile it. No, after compilation it will take some time for compilation. Let's wait till it get compiled. It's taking a lot of time for compilation. Right, well, now let's run this java space file demo. Okay, sorry, I didn't save this actually. Let's save it. Let's run it one more time. Let's compile it. Let's run it. So that you can see here, right, go ahead and vote because our age is 18 here. Right, this condition executes and we're getting go ahead and vote. Now let's say my age is not 81. Let's say my age is 14. Right, let's save it and now let's run it. Let's compile it. Let's run it. What it is saying here, not eligible for routing. Why I am not eligible for routing? Because my age is 14 here. First in F, it checks the condition whether age is greater than or equal to 18. Is 14 greater than or equal to 18? No, right? This condition is not executing here. This condition is false. So that it skips the logic in the if block, and the logic in the else block gets executed. Here the what you have printed, not eligible for routing. Now this is if else loop, right? I hope you understand about if else loop. Now in if else loop only we have other thing. What if we have multiple conditions to check, right? Here we are only checking one condition, right? If you have multiple conditions to check, then we need to use else if. Okay. If you have only one condition, then we can use if only if and else. If you have multiple condition, we can use else if and dion. Here also we will give some logic. Next, else logic. Now this is the syntax of if, and else. This is known as if else ladder. Okay. If we have more than one condition we are checking for, this is known as if else ladder, right? For suppose I am checking for condition 1. If this condition is true, this logic get executed. Otherwise, if this condition is true, this logic gets executed. If none of the condition was true, the logic inside the else block will be executed, right? Let me explain this with the help of example. Now let's remove this. Right. Here I am declaring 3 variables. Int a is equal to 4, b is equal to 5, and c is equal to, let's say, 2. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to find the biggest among these 3 numbers. Right? How can I find? I can use if else ladder here. Now I have to give some condition here. If, let's check first, a is bigger than b and c or not, right? If a greater than b, right, and greater than c, then what we need to print? We need to print a is bigger. We are checking here whether a is greater than b and c, right? Because I want to print the biggest among these 3 numbers, right? If a is greater than b and a is greater than c, we need to print a is bigger. Now let's check whether b is bigger than a and c. So that we need to use else if here. The condition will be greater than a and b greater than c. Then system.out.println, what would we print? B is bigger. Now if this condition and this condition fails, right, what is that? Then we will execute the else block. In else block we should print c is bigger, right? Let's save it. Let's compile it first. Let's run it. Okay, what we are getting? We are getting b is bigger, right? Among this b is bigger, right? Because b is 5. What we are doing here, first we are checking whether a is greater than b and a is greater than c in else block, right? If a is bigger, it will return a is bigger. And next we are checking whether b is greater than a or b is greater than c, right? If this condition is true, this logic will be printed, right? If none of the conditions were true, then this logic will be printed. Now let's change the value of c to 9. Let's save it and let's compile it. Now let's run it. What's the output here? C is bigger. Now what happening is, here the first, this condition will be checked. This condition is false, right? what is A? 4 is greater than B. 4 is greater than 5. This is wrong, right? So that it skips this logic. Now next it checks this. If B is greater than A. Is B is greater than A? Yes, 5 is greater than 4. And it also checks whether B is greater than C or not. B is 5 and C is 9. Is 5 greater than 9? No, right? So that this condition also fails. The both condition are failed. If condition is failed, else if condition is failed. So that if these both conditions are failed, the logic inside the else block executes. Now the output is C is bigger. Right? I hope you got a good grip on if else condition and if else ladder. Right? Now next let's enter into loops. Okay. First let's learn about for loop. Now before learning for loop or while loop or do while loop, we should know what is a loop, right? A loop is nothing but which executes the logic in iterations. For suppose we have some logic here. The logic can be anything. We have some logic. Now we need to repeat this logic for n number of times, right? Then we use loops. Let's say we have x is equal to 1 and y is equal to 2. Now result will be x plus y, right? What is this x plus y here? This x plus y is nothing but logic, right? We have declared x is equal to 1, y is equal to 2, and we are adding that x and y. This addition of x and y is known as logic, right? We are doing it one time here, right? We are doing it one time, but if we want to do it multiple times, then that is known as loop. Okay, if we want to execute some logic multiple times in iterations, then we use loop, whether it's a for loop or while loop or do while loop, based on the condition, right? I hope you are good with loops. What is loop? If you want to execute some logic in iterations, if you want to execute some logic number of times, then we use loops. The loops are three types: for loop, while loop, sorry, and we have do while loop. These are the three types of loops we have in Java, right? A loop is nothing but which execute the logic a number of times. If you want to execute this logic some number of times, then we use loops. Loops are three types: for loop, while loop, and do while loop. Now let's learn about each loop individually. Let's learn for loop. We have three types of loops, right? For loop, while loop, do while loop. Now when to use which loop, right? Let's learn that. Now this for loop can be used only when we know number of iterations, right? When we know number of iterations means when we know how many times the logic should be iterated, then we use for loop. For example, we have a is equal to 2, b is equal to 3. Result will be a plus b. Now this is logic, right? To repeat this logic 10 number of times, then we can use for loop. Why are using for loop here? Because we know how many times this logic should be repeated, right? This logic should be repeated 10 times. We know how many times the logic should be repeated, how many times the iteration should be done. If we know how many times the iteration should be done, then we will use for loop. In while loop, we do not know how many times the iteration should be done. For suppose the same logic a plus b here, we do not know how many times the logic should be repeated. Let's say here n, we do not know the value of n. So that when we don't know how many times the logic should repeat, then we will use while loop, right? I hope you understood what is for loop and while loop. I'll explain do while loop separately after the completion of explaining of for loop and while loop, right? Now you understand about for loop, right? When we use for loop, when we know the number of iterations, when we know how many times the logic should be repeated, then we use for loop. Let me explain for loop with an example, right? Clear all this. Now I want to print first 10 natural numbers. Okay, I want to print 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. How can I print? I can print like system.out.println, and again system.out.println 2. I can do like this, right? If I want to print first 10 natural numbers, okay, I can use system.out.println. What if I want to use 100? What if I want to print 100 natural numbers, means 1 to 100? We cannot write this in 100 times, right? The system.out.println, the code will become more longer and it become inefficient, right? So to avoid this, we'll use for loop here. Why we're using for loop here? We know how many numbers to repeat, right? First, for suppose we need 100 numbers to print. Okay, I want 100 numbers to be printed. Now here I know that the 100 numbers to be printed means 100 times the iteration should be done, so that the number of iterations is known, so that we are going to use for loop here. Now how the for loop looks like? For we have to declare a variable here which starts from 1. Why 1? Because we want to print the values from 1 to 100, right? So that I am starting it from 1, and I less than equal to 100 means I also want to print 100th value. And next I plus plus. I plus plus is nothing but iteration, right? Now system.out.println, I want to print I. Okay, now let's save this. Let's see whether it executes or not. Let's compile it first. Sorry. The compilation is done. Let's run it. Now you can see, right, it printed 100 numbers, 1 to 100, right? It printed 100 numbers. Now how this is getting executed, let me explain. Now in this case we want to print 100 natural numbers, right? Then why we are using only for loop? Because we know here how many times we need to iterate. We need to iterate 100 times, right? So that to print 100 natural numbers I need to start from 1, right? So that I initialize the variable I to 1 initially, because I need to print from 1. If I need to print from 2, I will print 2 here, right? Now till how many numbers we need to print? Till 100 numbers we need to print, so that I less than or equal to 100. And why this I plus plus? For suppose first initially int I is equal to 1, right? The I will be printed here. And next what happens? I plus plus means initial I is 1, right? Let me explain you. Initially I is 1 here, right? Initially I is 1 here, and after I is 1 in system.out.println, the I will be printed, means 1 will be printed. Now in the next step, what is this? I plus plus means I gets incremented, means I changes to 1 to 2. Now next again 2 will be printed, right? Now next I plus plus, again I will be 3, the I value changes to 3, so that the system.out.println I means I is 3, 3 will be printed. Now again I plus plus, so that it will become 4. This time the I value is 4, so that 4 will be printed. This time it executes and it executes until this condition is false, right? At some place the I will be 100, right? It checks condition 100 less than or equal to 100, right? So that in next step what will I become? 101, right? Now it checks this condition whether 101 is less than or equal to 100. No, right? 101 is greater than 100. This time the logic is false, so that it comes out of this for loop. This is how the for loop works, right? I hope you got a good idea on how for loop works. Now let's learn how while loop works. Okay, how while loop works. Now when we use for loop, when we know number of iterations, then we have to use for loop. For suppose I want to iterate the logic for 100 times, then I will use for loop, because I know the number of iterations is 100. Now while loop is used when we do not know number of iterations, right? Let me give an example to you. For suppose I am logging into some website, any website, okay? When I am logging in, it asks for two things, right? The email and password, okay? if I entered my email here, some random email, okay. Now I entered some password. Next I will click on submit, right? Suppose I entered here wrong password. When I enter wrong password and I click on submit, what will it do? It will prompt the user again to enter the password, right? Till the user entered the correct password, it will prompt the user to enter correct password, enter correct password, enter correct password. For suppose the first time I entered the wrong password, what the UI will show is enter the correct password. Now for the second time also my password is wrong. Again the message will show enter the correct password. If third time also I did the wrong password, again it will show enter the correct password. Means till the correct password, we type the correct password, this message will display. Right? You understand, right? Till we enter the correct password, this message will display. Means as a user, the user will not know as a, for suppose I am a user, I don't know at which step I am going to enter the new correct password, right? First step I am entering the wrong password, second step I am entering the wrong password, third step maybe I enter new password or the wrong password, right? Here as a user I don't know at which step I am going to enter the correct password, so that here the number of iterations are unknown, right? Because we don't know when the user is going to enter the correct password. For suppose if we know the user is going to enter the correct password at second time, then we can say number of iterations as 2. But as a user we don't know, right, when we type the correct password, so that here the number of iterations are unknown. The number of iterations are unknown, so that in this condition we use while loop. Okay, when we use while loop, when the number of iterations are unknown, then we use the while loop. When we use for loop, the for loop is used when the number of iterations are known. We already learnt it by in the previous example, right? That is for loop and this is while loop. While loop is used when the number of iterations are unknown. Why here the number of iterations are not known? Because we cannot know when, at which time, means at which step, at which iteration the user is going to enter correct password, whether it is 2, 3 or 5. We don't know, right, at which step the user is going to enter correct password, so that here the number of iterations are unknown. When the number of iterations are unknown, then we will use while loop. Okay, when the number of iterations are known, we use for loop. When the number of iterations are unknown, we will use while loop. Now this is for loop and while loop. Now let's learn what is do while loop. What is this do while loop? Do while loop is nothing but the do while loop is executed at least once if the condition is even false. You understood, right? For suppose I'm executing something. Let me go through VS Code once. I'll explain you something. Let me remove this logic. Okay, now let's give int a is equal to 100, right? Now here while using while condition here, while a less than 100, okay, while a less than 100, system.out.println print, I want to print here a. Okay, let's save this. Saving this, let me compile this, run it. So what happened here? When int a is equal to 100, right? Let's say it is true, while true. Okay, when we use while true means we will use while true, it is known as infinite loop. Okay, when we use true inside the while parenthesis, this is known as infinite loop. If we run this, suppose when we run this will be executed infinite number of times. It will not stop. We need to stop it manually. This is known as infinite loop. The infinite loop is only possible when we use while, and in parenthesis we need to use true. Okay, while it is true, then it is known as infinite loop, and the logic under it will execute infinite number of times. This is known as infinite loop. Only it is possible when we are using while condition, right? Only this is the condition when we get infinite loop. While in parenthesis we need to mention true. When we mention this condition, it is known as infinite loop, and the logic inside the while loop will be executed infinite number of times, right? I hope you are good with while loop also. Now, what is this do while loop? What is this do while loop means? For suppose will and if condition, right? Suppose I'm giving some condition here. Okay, I'm giving this condition here, and I have some logic here, right? Now, when this logic will be executed, only when the condition is true, right? Only we have one thing here. If the condition is true, then the logic is executed. Else, the logic will be not executed, right? We have only one condition. If the condition mentioned here is true, then logic will be executed. If the condition is false, it will not get executed. Now, what is the functionality of do while loop is? Do while loop must execute once if the condition is true or false. You got it right. Whether the condition is true or whether the condition is even false, it will get executed one time compulsory. Right? Let me run through an example. For suppose I have int I is equal to 5 here, and I am using do here. I want to print system dot out dot ln. What I want to print is, I want to print here I. Okay, and we have also while, right? Because it is do while loop. While I less than or equal to 4. Okay, now sorry, it's not I, it's high. Okay, I want to print high. Now what is this? What's happening here? Initially I declared int I is equal to 5. What is do while loop? Do while loop, the condition of do while loop is it will be executed at least once when the condition is false. Right? You got it right. Even if the condition is false, it will get executed. This is the functionality of do while loop, right? It will get executed at least once even the condition is false. Let's learn it through an example. Here initially I declared int I is equal to 5, right? Now in do while loop, first we execute do loop. What is this do saying? Hey, what is do saying? Hey, I want to print high. And the condition in while is we should only print this high while I is less than or equal to 4. What is high I here? But I is 5, right? Is 5 is less than or equal to 4? It is wrong, right? But still the output will be high. Why? Because do while loop will be executed at least once even if the condition is false. This condition is false, right? In the while loop, what is this condition? I less than or equal to 4. But I is 5. 5 less than or equal to 4. It is wrong, right? Even it is wrong, the high will be printed one time. This is the functionality of do while loop. Even if the condition is false, it will be executed at least once. Right? This is do while loop. These are the loops in Java. I hope you got a good grip on the loops and also if else ladder. If you have any doubts, please comment it. Thank you. Let's meet in the next class.